right, I'd like to welcome you to the 2021 Canaltown Virtual Book Fest. My name is Patricia Miller, and on behalf of the Canaltown Book Fest Committee, I would like to acknowledge and thank our sponsors whose support helps to make this event possible. Our sponsors are the Dover Public Library, the Tuscarawas County Literacy Coalition, the Canal Dover Association, the Bibliophile Bookshop in downtown Dover, and of course, our Canaltown Book Festival Committee. The topic of this panel today is the basics of writing a book, and I'm very pleased that we have three very experienced authors with us today that are going to be sharing their thoughts and their insights with us on that topic. But before we start to introduce them, I do want to give you some housekeeping announcements. First of all those who are participating as viewers will need to keep their video off and keep their audio muted. All participants are welcome and encouraged to ask questions by typing them in the chat bar. Then I will take note of them and I will present them and ask them to the panelists as we have time. Each of the three authors that we have on our panel today will speak for approximately 10 minutes, and they'll be one by one on the topic. And lastly, this panel is being recorded, and after our book fest is complete, it will be uploaded and available to be viewed on YouTube at your convenience. All right, so let's get started with our first presenter. Our first presenter is Joan Ramirez. Joan holds a Master of Science in Business, Medical, and Technical Journalism, as well as two others in English as a Second Language and Education. She has published on a variety of topics from cochlear implants to the economy, and has conducted workshops, both domestic and foreign, on the nuances of business communications for managers and startup companies. She's the leader of her own enterprise with training programs over 25 years in expertise for entrepreneurs at all levels. For many years, she trained the technical staff of a large engineering firm in the nuances of business, writing, and presentation. Her latest publication is The Right Rules, which is a handbook with communications guidelines for becoming an entrepreneur. And she can be reached at Joan at jonesbookshelf.com. Joan, we'd like to welcome you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I'm just going to get my PowerPoint up.
All right.
There we go. And I will begin. The basics of book writing. First of all, you have to figure out your genre. There's fiction, using your imagination. There's nonfiction, based on the facts. There's themes, there's children's books, there's mystery novels. So you have a plethora of choices here. These are the basic themes, each of which is an entity unto itself. We could spend countless webinars on this, but I don't want to do that. I want to get into the 3-act structure. Everything begins with opening with an interesting first line to draw your reader in. That's your main mission as a writer. If you hook them there, you'll have them turning the pages until the end. That's key. So the middle, you want to keep building up the action with scenes and sequels, scenes, and then follow-up. That's what sequels are, the follow-up to the scenes that have memorable characters and dialogue that is paced appropriately. I say paced appropriately because you don't have someone looking in a valley and then jumping off a cliff. No. Don't have a protagonist running from a burning building and 2 pages later walking down the aisle. Make the ending, make sure it is appropriate for your genre. For an example, in a romance, the lovebirds unite. In a mystery, the villain is caught. And no violence or profanity in a children's book, please. And also, never, never, never would you kill off a child. That's a no-no. But the basics is you have to start with a hook. something to draw the reader in. The middle is where you have to keep the action going, otherwise, it sinks, and no one wants anything in their writing to sink. The ending, please make sure it's appropriate for your genre, as I have just said. And obviously, no violence, anything that deals with children. Characters. Every character has his or her own personality. Make them come alive with visual descriptions, because I'm visual, and have them doing things in each chapter that advance the plot. Otherwise, your reader will be bored, and so will you as the author. You must advance the plot. So your characters must come alive. Do character sketches, act it out, anything that will help you. Emotions. Readers care about protagonists and villains who are emotional. Show how much a character cares by going into a burning building to save his dog, even though the villain is pointing a gun to his head. Show the villain going weak in the knees that the dog reminds him of his own, killed in a car accident. I will point out all villains have something in them that is good. Why they become villains, that is your choice to point out as an author. But show both sides of a villain. And please make the readers care. I just finished a book, and at the end of it, I cried. Before that, I finished a book, and I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything. You want the reader to feel something. That way, they will buy more of your books. Use an active voice. Please don't be passive in your writing. The first president of our country was George Washington. Oh, that's so boring. George Washington showed bravery in war and peace. This is so much better because it's active. It's written in an active voice. You would not want to sit in a class with a professor that was in a monotone voice and doing A. You'd fall asleep. You probably wouldn't get a good grade. Well, you want your readers to come back, so be active. Dialogue. When two people are talking, show them doing things. If you want your reader to stay awake while reading, look at these examples. Number one, hi Ted, how are you? Jane asks. I'm fine, Jane. How are you doing? There's no life to this conversation. Maybe it's the way some people talk, but that's not what you want for your novel. Number two, Jane, I think Mrs. Johnson's house is being robbed, Ted said. Jane punched in 911 on her cell phone. I need to report a robbery. Already, you've got the reader nervous. What's going to happen? Is someone going to get hurt? That's the purpose of dialogue. Dialogue is an extension of emotion. What you're doing is you're giving the readers something to think about. That's what dialogue is. So everything has to come together. Pacing. Stories need action and exposition. Action, exposition is narrative. Take a look at a book in your favorite genre and notice how the author combines these two, which involve character movement and explanation of the scene. I'm going to refer to a classic, Gone with the Wind. In the book, the heroine Scarlett wants Ashley, but she winds up with Rhett. The point is, the author shows Scarlett plotting to get Ashley and the end pushing away Rhett. Show, be visual, act out the scenes in your head. If I were writing this book, I'd do what the brilliant author did. I would show Scarlett plotting to get Ashley. I would show her pushing Red away. But the pacing, you don't start out with two people meeting and then right away they're standing in front of the minister, the rabbi, whoever. I mean, that is silly. So you have to pace things out. That's the way real life is. Put in drama. Build a world where everything doesn't go right by including conflict between characters and problems. No one wants to read a book where the characters don't work for their happy ending. Speaking of endings, it's up to you to make it happy or sad, or a series in which the hero or heroine do or don't get what they want. The book is yours to shape and mold. I woke up on a beautiful September morning. I didn't think that I was going to be involved in September 11th with the building almost falling on me. That's the kind of drama you don't want. But you can certainly think about the kinds of thoughts that go through someone's mind as they're running away from a disaster. You want to put drama in. You want to make sure that if it's a series that you drag it out a little bit, but each plot is solid, a continuation one from the other. Okay, we're going to wrap things up. Whatever you set up in the beginning of the book has to be delivered in the end. If it's sad, lead up to that. If it's happy, indicate that it'll be a romance. Create characters who are real, interesting, and inspiring, and you're on your way to a bestseller in your eyes before the world sees it. And that's the biggest thing of all. You have to like what you do. You have to like what you do. You're not pleasing anyone before you please yourself. Your checklist. Read your work out loud from printed copy. Please read your work out loud so you can hear your words in your mind. Buy a book that teaches editing skills. I really should have said love. I love Self-Editing for Fiction Writers by Rennie Brown and Dave King because they really make you work for your book. Have your book novel edited by a professional. Just put developmental editors in Google and tons will pop up. Then it's up to you to research their backgrounds and fees. Yes, kiss of death, don't send a book off to an agent, a publisher, anyone without having a professional look at it. Decide whether you want an agent or going the self-published route. However, either way, your book needs to be professionally edited. More so if you're going to self-publish because there are little nuances in each genre that you might miss that a developmental editor will pick up on. And that is why you are paying them. And that is also up to you. You have carte blanche in what you pay. I've published fiction and nonfiction in traditional and self-publishing industries. Your novel career is in your hands. Handle it with care. And please do read out loud. And please be careful of all the things that I said. It does make a difference. I have 3 books in a drawer that'll never see the light of day. They shouldn't see the light of day. Now I'm thrilled with what I'm writing because I'm taking my own advice. Thank you so much.
There, that's better. Wow, that was a lot of great information. I was so excited to respond that I forgot to unmute myself. That's a lot of great information. And there's some questions that we'll go back to, excuse me, after everyone's done. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on now to Sandra Gurvis. Hi, Sandra. She can be found at www.sandragurvis.com. And she's the author of 17 commercially published books and hundreds of magazine articles. Along with her recently released 111 Places in Columbus That You Must Not Miss, her travel titles include Myths and Mysteries of Ohio, Ohio Curiosities, 2nd edition, and Day Trips from Columbus, 3rd edition. Having recently moved near Sarasota, she is currently working on 2 projects, 3 Ringling Circus for Roman and Littlefield about the Ringling influence on Sarasota, and Doing Hard Time in Geezerville, which is the first of a 3-part novel on the villages. All right, welcome, Sandra. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Joan did a great job of pretty much covering the basics of fiction writing. And I'm working on both a fiction and nonfiction. So I'm going to talk more about nonfiction. A little bit about the basics of how to construct a nonfiction book, whether you're self-publishing it or you have a regular publisher. The first thing that you need to come up with is a concept of a book. With 3 Ringling Circus, I knew my background, I knew my interests. I like to do the odd and unusual. So for me, circuses was a natural. I reached out to a publisher I worked with before. I was, kind of fortunate and got a book contract. But now I am responsible for writing a 45,000 word book with 180 photos, which I don't care how many books you've written, it is as intimidating as heck. I don't care who you are, how many books you've written. So getting started is on any nonfiction or fiction project, whether you have a $100,000 advance, which I definitely do not, or whether you're doing it out of love, it's the same. So you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to do this. The first thing that I do, and I'm not going to do screen sharing right now because there's so little time, But you've all seen table of contents in books. Okay, so you develop a table of contents for nonfiction. That is the backbone of any nonfiction book. It will give you the idea of where the book is headed. Okay, so I started out with Ring 1, which is the history of the circus, Ring 2, which is the history of Sarasota, and Ring 3, which is the history of the Ringlings. And so I broke it down, and I broke it down into how many words I was going to write in each section. So for example, Ring 2, history of Sarasota, which I'm working on now because I figured the history of the circus was me being lazy and not going for the deep dive research that I needed to do. That is 6,000 words. I have 3 chapters that I have to write: ancient Sarasota, the early settlers, and the robber barons. Break those down into 2,000 words. So now all I have to do is write 500 to 1,000 words a day, which is not easy when you're doing a ton of research. So here you are, you have a nonfiction book. Everything has to be correct, and the research is overwhelming, especially for this book, because I just moved to Florida and I really don't know a lot about my new state. So I talked to teachers, I went to librarians, I called historical societies, which were mostly closed because of COVID, so they weren't really willing to talk to me. I called the Ringling Museum, and it was kind of the same thing. They said, well, they gave me all kinds of online resources. Any place I could get, information. There's a whole vast arena of people out there. Librarians are your friends. Historical societies are your friends. Museums, whatever you're writing about, they are going to help you get what you need. The other thing is, sometimes people, are not willing to talk to you. Just be nice and persistent and don't give up. And if they say no, then do a workaround, find something else, find another source for your information. The third thing that I had to do with this one particularly, I decided when I finally got myself organized, I set aside 2 days a week to write this book, because we all do a lot of different things. And I do this also in my fiction. When I'm working on a book project, I say with my novel, I work on it 1 day a weekend. If with the nonfiction book, I have another thing that I need to do Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, other assignments and a commitment. So I work on the book Monday and Fridays. I do that every day, no matter what, every time, no matter what. So it gets done. Even if I feel like I'm not getting anything done, I'm sitting there working on it. Right? It doesn't matter what kind of mood you're in, rain, shine, bad mood, whatever. I have a deadline of September 2022, which sounds like a really far time away, but it is not. When you have to research every little aspect of this book, which I have to do. And I'm working hard on it now. And it's especially not easy when you're the world's slowest writer, which I am. I was talking to some people and I said, yeah, I'm the world's slowest walker and I'm the world's slowest writer. Okay, I'm trying to watch the time. Pro tips. Okay, these are things that I've done for doing a number of nonfiction books. Check out and study competing books. They can be your best sources of information, inspiration, and also what not to do. I went to the library, got a bunch of books for this first section on historical Sarasota. And there was one on a very academic book on this Spanish. And it was really boring. I was like, I can't use this book. Well, I needed it. I had to go back to the library and get it again. So, I mean, you just got to keep these books around you, buy them or check them out or whatever. Because they are your friends as well as the others. Always identify and cite your sources. I cannot emphasize this enough. Editors and publishers use programs to run everything we write to Google, and they have many programs and you can be accused of plagiarism, even if you only use a few words in a sentence. So if you are writing something and you see something from another source, either you cite it, you do a link, or you put it at the bibliography, you quote it, and even if you don't quote it, you still cite it, or you rewrite it so that it sounds just like you. Even 3 words strung together, they'll nail you. I mean, it's really hard. In a way, it's harder because you do it unintentionally, and I think people do it unintentionally. You have to really be on guard for that. Keep a record of your sources so you can use them. You can use them in the bibliography at the end, and you won't have to reinvent the wheel. as I write, I research, and I pull all my research. I pull the links, I pull the articles, even the little tiny things I use. And I label the chapter on ancient Sarasota. I have like 40 pages of typewritten notes. I mean, that I pulled, not that I typewrote. Okay, this goes into being organized. You need a file organization system. I try to keep it simple. Try to keep it as simple as possible. I use folders titled Ringling Book. I have chapter 1, Ancient Sarasota, and then I have everything on that chapter. Okay, keep your eyes and ears open. While you are writing this book, you have to talk about it to everybody. I was at a dinner last night and I mentioned the book, and this woman said to me, do you know that Sarasota County is the library is having a 100-year celebration of the establishment of the county? And I didn't know that. I'm thinking, I need to get in touch with these people. So talking up your book will give you ideas of how to promote it, because I don't know how you guys feel. To me, promotion is the hardest part. Trying, knocking on those doors, trying to get people, to buy and read your book. And so also I want to talk, I don't know how I'm doing with time. I'm trying to, good or bad? How am I doing with time, Pat?
You're doing good. You're not at the 10-minute mark yet.
Okay. I'm trying to get as quickly as I want to. I also want to talk a little bit about the differences between fiction and nonfiction. Again, I said set a specific time to write one, okay. You're with fiction as well. When I'm doing this book on the villages, your research needs to be as accurate as possible. It's not as quite as demanding with precision with every little thing, but it has to be accurate, or at least in a gray area, because readers, including me, are always looking for mistakes or errors or faulty logic. And if I'm reading a book or hearing a book on Audible and I hear something and it doesn't ring true, and I get more than one of those, I'm done. And that sounds cold, but it's jarring, and you have to be on guard for that, because that's the easiest way to lose readers, both in fiction and nonfiction. Even if you're creating a fictional world, a fantasy book, it still needs to be logical and make sense. Okay, also, and I think Joan touched on this also, and I know there are certain rules with children's books that don't apply to adult fiction. I only write adult fiction, so I use lots of cuss words in my fiction, and I do, I can't help it sometimes. But I have one character that is like the prologue, all she's doing is cussing, and I'm like, okay. But people read it and they go, oh, we really enjoyed this. So, it just depends. But that said, sensitive subjects need to be handled with care. Part of my book on the Geezerville, it's a series of 3 novels that I'm going to work on. I'm just starting on the first one. It's kind of a romance, an interracial romance. And my female character is first person, and my male character is Black. And he's a lawyer, and he's very smart. And he's third person. So I wrote almost a 35-page chapter about him. And I had to talk about certain situations which depicted racial discrimination. As a white person, I react one way to it, but Black people react differently. So and of course I try to be, it goes without saying. Anyway, to wind up quickly, I had a friend, and having people read your book, again, as Joan recommended, I have a friend who's Black. And I said, I don't care if you like it. I don't care if you find errors. I've got other people help me with that. Tell me if you think I'm on the mark with this thing. It's really helpful if you're stretching yourself. And I always like to stretch myself to have that input. Okay. And the other thing I want to say is, even though my book is a satire on the villages and people are like always rolling their eyes, why would you ever live there? You have to show a love. You have to show a reason why people will live there, because there are hundreds of thousands of people who live there, and I see the appeal, and that's the other thing. Okay, I'm done. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my marathon talk here.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you. And I like the fact that you touched on the nonfiction as well. That's excellent. Thank you.
I thought it was important too. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. All right, I just want to remind our viewers, make sure you keep those questions coming in. And we're going to move on to Rich Zahradnik. Hope I got that right. Oh, yay. Okay. All right. Rich is the author of the Coleridge Taylor Mysteries, including the Shamus award-winning novel Lights Out Summer. Before turning to fiction, he was a journalist for 30 years. I'm sure that's going to give us a lot of insight. Thank you so much for coming and being with us here, Rich.
Thank you for having me, Patricia, and the festival. Joan and Sandra, that's great stuff. You covered the waterfront in both fiction and nonfiction, which makes me kind of happy. I decided to focus on two things and not one thing. I'm going to drill down into a couple things because I was thinking when I was starting, what would I have wanted someone to tell me? The thing I'm not going to talk about, even though I'm talking about it, is ideas. Ideas are easy. They are in fiction, I think, a nickel a dozen. They're not the work. The work is the writing, which is my point 3, which I'll jump to in a minute. But I often have people come up to me and tell me, I've got an idea for a novel. And I think half of them want me to write that novel. And I explain, I've got 35 index cards with ideas for novels on them. That, you know, I mean, if you're in this session and you don't have an idea, that would surprise me, because most people who say, I want to write a book or I want to write a novel, they've got at the start an idea. The first thing I want to talk about is the thing I wish I would have known or thought about or knew a lot more about when I sat down to write my first manuscript. Because within the first 1, 2, 3, or maybe 4 sentences, this decision will determine thousands of other decisions in your book. And the question is, who is your narrator? Now, by that, I do not mean simply the character attributes of your narrator. Like a lot of the writers who outline, they do whole character profiles before they start. I fly by the seat of my pants. I make them up. But you may know your narrators, what they look like and all those other things. But what I'm talking about are the what you might call the craft or the technique decisions about your narrator. Are you writing in first or third person? This will have a major impact on how you can tell your story and ways that you can tell your story, and I'll come back to that. If in third person, are you using multiple third person? Are you changing points of view to different third person narrators, often found in thrillers more than mysteries? I'll say one thing about third person before I go back to the other points. At least in mysteries, and I am mainly talking about the crime genre, that's where I've been published. I have written kids fantasy, but it wasn't published. I'm mainly talking about crime, but third person in crime is not omniscient. In fact, the only place I know anyone using omniscient anymore is in literary fiction. First of all, it's very hard to write an omniscient mystery, because if you're in everybody's head, then you're going to be in the head of someone who knows what happened or too much of what happened. But the kind of omniscient writing where the narrator is literally jumping from head to head within a chapter, which you'll find in Victorian literature and in some literary novels, is not found in crime fiction, and agents and editors don't like it. And if they don't like a thing, because it's not working for the audience now, it's chancy to write that way. Whether your narrator is reliable or unreliable. Gone Girl is the pretty famous recent book that made the unreliable narrator possible or popular. This is the narrator who is basically lying to you, the audience. I could have a whole separate discussion about this. Maybe it's because I can't write one. I don't like unreliable narrators, because in the end, it's kind of a convenience that where the author can decide when the narrator lies and when the narrator doesn't. If someone's unreliable, I would expect them to be unreliable all the time. It does create nice red herrings because of when they deviate from the truth, but again, it's not particularly for me. I said it before, but don't head hop. If you're in the third person, it's usually best to change by chapter, at least by section break, so people know you're moving from inside one person's head to inside another. And I'll go back to what I said about first person, third person. Everybody knows what first person is, I guess. This is the story that is told with an I. very popular mysteries going back to Raymond Chandler. It's all from the narrator is telling you the story. You're using I all the time, although you always got to remember there's a difference between you, the writer, and this character narrator that's telling the story. There is distance between you two, and you're using them to tell the story, but it's all their point of view. They can't read people's minds. They can't know things that are going on outside of the room that they're in. They're all experiencing it from their point of view. Third person in mysteries, it's called third person close, is pretty much the same. You're telling the story in third person, but it's from the POV of one character, unless you're changing characters and chapters. It's kind of like, rather than first person where you're inside this person, you're on their shoulder. You can only see and know and smell and talk about what they know. You can only feel what they feel. They can guess what other people feel, but you can only feel what they feel. But the third person narrator does create a little bit of a more distance between you and the narrator. With first person, all your writing has to be using the language that person would use, the word choice, the way sentences, with the sentence length, thought length, the way they would think, that's all got to be, again, third person. You get a little bit of narrator distance. You're still all from their point of view, but there's points where you move in real close and you describe their thoughts directly. This is either by using italics or by saying I thought, or he thought, sorry, I just broke it, he thought. But you've got this little bit of distance between you and that POV person who is telling the story. As I said, the character can only know what the character can know, and this is hard. I got on a recent manuscript, someone picked up my character, and it's in third, is in a room. Someone's after him. The door's closed. There's a smash on the door. He says, you know, a shoulder hit the door. Well, of course, he can't see through the door. He doesn't know a shoulder hit the door. Okay. The man hit the door, or the agent hit the door, or, you know, they did something to the door, but being that specific means you're seeing through the door. And these are little things about the craft that build up to creating a narrator that readers want to read. Your other choice in narration will be whether you're writing in past, regular past, or present tense. A lot of YA is written in present tense. There are some mysteries that are written in present tense. It is a choice that, at least in crime, you're not ruled out from writing in present. More of it is written in past than in present. It gives, some would say, a more immediate feel. And finally, what's this all supposed to add up to? This narrator. Almost every publisher and agent I've ever heard either speak or listen to webinars, panels, when you ask what they want, about 95% of them say they're looking for voice. They're looking for a new voice. And then you ask people to define voice, and it's kind of like that definition by a judge, or when he was asked to define obscenity, he said he didn't know what it was, but he knew it when he saw it. And it's the same with voice. I use this example whether people hate the book or like the book when they're forced to read it in high school, but Catcher in the Rye. Page 1 of Catcher in the Rye, you hear Holden Caulfield in your head. And if you go through what's on that page, you get a lot of ideas of what Salinger is doing to create this voice of the narrator. There are first, they say first person is the easier one to get a strong voice in. It's also the easiest one to make a mistake in, where someone tries to do a kind of a ripoff, or they try and do another Raymond Chandler, and it comes off sounding like parody. There are strong third person voices in my field, at least. Michael Connolly writes the Bosch series. Dennis Lehane, many of his books are third person, and they are the combination of all the decisions that I just mentioned, plus individual word and phrase choices, choices about whether they're reliable or unreliable or not. Really, all the writing creates the voice of your narrator, creates the voice of the book. And which brings me to my third point, which is if you want to write a book, you got to write. I have met a lot of people that's told me they wanted to write a book, and I could pretty much tell whether they were going to write one or not. You need to know all the things you've heard here today. You need to know a lot more than you've heard here today, but you need to start putting words on paper. I asked each of us that's a writer has at least one teacher who meant something. And I had one in high school, and I went up to him and I said, I want to be a writer. What do I do? And he said, you really want to be a writer? I said, yeah. This guy went to a great school. He was playwright. I was looking for the magic words. He said, you really want to be a writer? I said, yes, I want to be a writer. I said, well, write 1,000 words a day. I said, no, tell me the secret magic. And no, write 1,000 words a day. And no, it doesn't necessarily have to be 1,000 words a day. When I was working full-time doing this, sometimes it was 200 words in the morning and more on the weekend. I know everybody can't be writing full-time, but writers write. You got to write. You got to write to find a voice. You got to write to make sure you understand the craft points I've outlined, as well as the broader array of points you've heard. Particularly, I'm commenting on fiction now that Joan brought up, because she covered a lot of other things I would talk about if there were time, like structure and all those other things. Finally, beyond writing, you got to read. Now, I'm at a book festival, so I don't think this is going to be a problem here, but I meet, even at conferences, people that want to write, like, say, crime fiction, that haven't read much crime fiction. So, maybe they sit down and write a cozy mystery that's got a lot of machine guns in it and bloody people all over the floor. I mean, I'm using an obvious example of a particular mystery type that has a very specific set of rules or expectations, but you gotta read outside what you're going to write, but you got to read inside what you're writing. See, not because you're going to chase the market, but see what people are doing and how they're doing it. I could talk all day, but I think you pick up one book, you're going to learn a lot more about a narrator and voice than everything I could say. That's me. Thank you for having me.
Gotta quit forgetting to mute myself. Thank you very much, Rich. There's a lot there too. All right, we're going to ask all the panelists to go ahead and unmute for the questions and answers. That way you can jump off of each other's answers in a pretty smooth fashion. All right, so Rich, you kind of started talking a little bit about the planning out. And I'm curious, you said you're a pantster, right? You don't do much. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Joan, Sandra, what about you guys? Do you plan out an outline, or do you sit down and just write?
Oh my God, extensive outline, extensive.
Okay.
And I'm somewhere in the middle. For my nonfiction book, extensive outlines. For the new book I'm working on, the previous two books, the first one I was a lot of outlines, but this one, I have no idea. I kind of have an idea what's happening, but I'm letting my characters just go with it. Seriously. So I do have a general idea, and I do follow the rules, but
right.
and it's so much fun. I'm really having fun with it. So.
And I would say, I mean, there's always a panel at a writers' convention about pantsing versus outlining, like it's, Protestant versus Catholic or whatever. And it's a fun debate, but the thing is, people shouldn't obsess on it. There's not a right way. I mean, I know why I do it. It's because if I sat down to write an extensive outline, I'd get to the third bullet point and want to start writing the scene. That's me, right? But James Patterson outlines every book, and he's the best-selling crime writer in the world. So if you're sitting there saying, I need a plan to get to the end of this book, then you're probably want to write an outline. If you start writing the outline and want to go to the book, now you know you're a pantser, but just sit down and start writing something that's going to point you in the direction of where to go.
Good answer. And that's where I was sort of heading, because a lot of writers, when they're starting out, they think there's one right way or wrong way to do that. And I think it's really what is comfortable and works for you. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Particularly in outlining, and I mean, you gotta have good grammar and stuff like that. But when it comes to outlining versus pantsing, even the structural debate, I like the 3-act structure. There are other people that use different structural models that come to the same end of an exciting book, if you assume mine are exciting, but it works.
Right. And I liked how you were talking about how sometimes you plan and sometimes you don't, because I agree with that. Sometimes you have to sit down and plan it, and other times it's just coming and you can't stop, because if you do, you're going to lose the flow of what the ideas you have. So I think it's great that you guys are supporting that, especially because I know we have a lot of writers and authors listening to us today. I was wondering, could one of you give a little background on the difference between a developmental editor and a line editor? Because I know that that's extremely important to make sure that your work is edited properly. And I think with a lot of us young, when you're first starting out, it's really hard to understand the different types of editing out there. Could somebody take that one?
Sure, I will. I was a line editor for a number of years ago, but a developmental editor, and maybe I'm wrong, is somebody who like looks at the big picture, looks at the overall structure, the organization, the logic of whatever it is you're writing, thinks about who the audience is, you know, and they work with you to shape the book essentially. Okay, so if you go off on a tangent, they'll rein you back in. A line editor is somebody who checks grammar, proofreading, factual fact checking, things like that, the basics, the nuts and bolts things. So the development editor is more conceptual, the line editor is more nuts and bolts. And somebody else wants to add something.
If you're paying for a developmental editor, you should get the same service that you would get from a publishing house, a developmental editor. And what they do is what was just defined, but the product you should get back is most, even very good writers, get a 9-page single-spaced memo about what the book needs done and needs not doing, which may come as a shock to you if you thought your work was a piece of genius. And then they do tend to do a markup of the manuscript, but they're not going for everything, not all the semicolons and everything, but they are marking it up, word usage, words in alike, it's not working with the voice. You do all that, and there's probably a few iterations of that. Even with a paid developmental editor, I pay a guy and I pay him a little bit more to make sure I've done what he's asked, because there's no point in doing it and then like having gone off this way when you're not giving this audience, professional audience, what they say you need. And copy editing, yes, the definition is easy. They're going to go through the manuscript that's now been developmentally edited and look for anything that might be wrong grammatically, spelling, factually, conflicts in facts, chapter numbers, the whole thing.
Another very important point, a line editor, you'll like what you see. A development editor, you might not. Only because if you want to get a book published, they will tell you what they think based on their expertise, not yours. So someone once said to me, author is God. Well, I don't know. Point being, a developmental editor will point out things that you need to mold, shape. It's not going to be a raw diamond anymore. It's going to be something that you can sell in Tiffany's. And that's what you want.
And I would say this is where you're going to hear a lot of like different, if you're going into this, a lot of different ways to go. You as a writer can pay someone to do this, or you can have a beta reader or beta readers. These are people you trust. They are not your mom. They're probably not your spouse. They're always going to tell you it's great. You might be in a book group. All these things can serve the role of the pre-agent submission development. I mean, you don't have to pay money. You can go these other routes. They have their strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
But you're looking for people to be honest with you about what's going on in the book.
Great.
I agree with you.
Go ahead.
But I'll also disagree with you in one respect. The nuances that I discussed, that is in the realm of the developmental editor. Because I have a better reader. I love her. I really love her. She's very honest. But developmental editors can be more objective, much more objective. And that's what you want. That's what you're paying for. And I'm paying mine a nice chunk of change. And I got a contract. The book went up for an award. So I know it was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you recommend checking references, checking with other authors, just seeing if they were pleased?
I would recommend checking with everyone, putting the name in online. The pandemic has exacerbated the idea of people just saying they can do this and that.
Right.
And they can't, definitely. Check thoroughly. It's your money.
Right. I think I was lucky. I struck gold, and I didn't really understand the difference between the different types of editors. And I ended up hiring for my trilogy. I ended up hiring someone who was definitely a developmental and creative editor. And what was wonderful about that was the things that he was sending back. I was standing up and walking around my living room going, wow, because he was pushing, really pushing for me to even go any further, get a little more braver, a little bolder. And and there's only a couple of things that he suggested that I ended up not taking because it simply didn't work, and he didn't know where the storyline was going in the next book. So I like those. Those are great ideas.
I argued with mine. She was wrong and I was right. And then I thought about it and I walked around the whole house and a lot of other things, and I was wrong.
Yes. And I can remember thinking, wow, if I do this, is my mother going to speak to me? But I realized that it really wasn't about that. It was about what the book needed and where the story needed to go. So
it's always about the story, and
right.
making it the best story possible. That's the
right
end game here. Whatever it needs to be done, even if you're not particularly happy with it sometimes.
Right. Could each of you take a couple of minutes and just talk about one of your books that you truly enjoyed the process of writing, that it just was a very fulfilling experience? Not that one book is better than the other, but I think we all have books that we just feel really good about the process when we did it. Could you share a little bit of that with us?
I teach autistic children, and I published Jamie is Autistic, Learning in a Special Way. That book is now in Chinese, it's in Spanish, and my beautiful webmaster told me it's in Japan. And that was the book of my heart so far, because these children are the loves of my life. And I ran it by them, and it wasn't until they were comfortable that I was comfortable. I just can't say enough about my kids, and that gave me joy. And I went over it and made sure that they were comfortable. I showed them the cover because I wanted them to be involved. I don't now, unfortunately, but I see them every day, and I wanted them to think well of what I was doing, and they're wonderful.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you. Sandra?
Oh, for me, I'm a little more objective, I think. My second novel, Country Club Wives, was a satire, and I think that humor and satire are really my true loves. There's a lot of the writing that I do is serious, because I do a lot of different kinds of writing. And that was a satire on New Albany, and I was recently, Ohio, and I was recently divorced, and I moved there, and I'm looking around thinking, this is low-hanging fruit. And I remember sitting there writing it on an airplane and laughing, and the person next to me looking at me like, but it was so much fun to write. I had such a great time with that book. And of course it was research, but the thing of it is, it was optioned for TV. I mean, it never went anywhere, but it did pretty well, and it was optioned for TV. So that book was hard because I had to do a lot of research, but it was also went very well. And the new project I'm working on, the Villages book, is kind of the same thing, although again, there's a lot of research involved. It's just fun, And it's like, I hope I'm having way too much fun. I hope it's good. That's sometimes what I think when I write something like this, like, this is way too much fun. So I hope that the readers think it's good.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, so every day when I sit down to write, I do a lot of procrastinating because writing is hard. And I probably write 5-6 hours a day, on good days. And after the wind up and the getting ready, I get into usually an hour or two part of that period where I'm going. Now, what I'm typing may be utter crap. In fact, when I go back to revise it, much of it is, but I'm in the moment of the story, and I'm getting it down on paper. And as a pantser, things start happening that I hadn't even thought of. Character, does something I didn't expect, and those the bigger little surprises are making me happy. So it's kind of hard. I mean, I've got 4 novels in a series that are published. The second book, Drop Dead Punk, the one thing I noticed was getting a first book published did one thing for me. It answered a lot of questions when you're writing your first book, you don't really have anybody to ask. You don't have an agent, you don't have, friends in the mystery business. And so every little decision is like you have to think about. And once the first book is published, many of those questions, including the ones I described about narrator, are answered. So I kind of felt, it was still hard, but that was lifted from me. But I would still say that the final book, which was Lights Out Summer, which set in 1977 New York. The protagonist is a reporter. He's a crime writer, and 1977 is the year that Son of Sam was shooting people. And I was kind of afraid of this story because I had put history in my book before, but I had to have my reporter maneuver around the real Son of Sam case without solving it, because he didn't solve it, without making people so interested in that they weren't following the mystery that I was writing. And when I got to the end and had pulled that off, which was a much harder trick than the first three books, I felt really good. And that's the one that won the Seamus. So yeah, that would be the one.
Yeah, when it all comes together, it's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep. Sandra, we have a person asking a question specifically to you. Carol's asking, she says, Sandra, you said something about 3 words and she missed that. Do you recall?
Words?
Yeah, not sure what she's referring to. Do you recall that?
I don't.
Okay, I apologize. She must have caught something there that.
I don't know.
Okay, that's okay. That's all right. Do each of you have a favorite author?
Hemingway, hands down.
Okay, Sandra?
That's a tough question. I like a lot of different authors. I don't have a favorite. I like a lot of different authors. So
You have a favorite genre?
Well, I love Dave Barry a lot. I love him. He's my favorite as far as being absolutely hilarious. Yeah, and he's like personally, that's who I really like. So yeah.
I was
And
really
as far
excited.
as genre, I like contemporary fiction, and I listen to a lot of it. And I like what Rich has said. This book that I'm working is kind of a mystery, and the other one, the Country Club Wives, is kind of a mystery. So I have been burying myself, reading mysteries, listening to mysteries on Audible, watching things on TV, figuring out the structure, figuring out the plot. I mean, you just, immersing yourself in whatever you love is really the only way to learn how to do it. Yeah.
Right. And I was excited to hear you talk about the humorous type, because I know we have one author listening to us right now that she is a humorist. I'm sure she's getting a lot of good ideas from you.
Well, we need a lot of humor these days. I think
we do. Yes, we do. Rich, do you have a favorite author or genre?
I probably have 50 books at number 1, but I'll go with trade and craft. I mentioned Michael Connelly, the Bosch series. And I pick him because, like me, he was a journalist, though he was a police reporter far longer than I was. And he, for me, he's great at structure, great at mystery, great at pulling you along. But I love his voice because when you read him, it doesn't feel really voicey. It's not like this Raymond Chandler, like there's a lot of jazzy stuff going on. You might think it's journalistic, though. If it were journalistic, 300 pages of it, of news stories strung together, you'd be bored. He has this subtle way with this voice of his of sucking you in, and then he's got you without you think all the fireworks, and then suddenly they're there. So I wouldn't say I try and write like him. I'm not trying to be him, but I like those techniques, and I love the books.
Great, yeah. Once you find somebody that you just absolutely love how they do it, I don't know about you guys, but I want to dissect it. I want to figure out how is it that they do it and learn from it.
Yeah, I just discovered Peter James, his books, and I was like, whoa. I'm always trying to discover new and old authors.
Yeah.
He's excellent.
Yeah, he's wonderful. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, I see that we're getting close in time. I know that there's so much more you have to offer, right?
Yeah, I hope author.
It's a great Freudian slip there. But I want to thank you all very, very much, each individually. Joan Ramirez, thank you so much for all of your insights and your experience that you shared. Sandra. Thank Sandra Gurvis. We really look forward to checking out your books as well. And Rich Zahradnik. Thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this was
Great.
great.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
for hosting us.
I'm so glad
having
you
the
enjoyed
festival.
it.
Yeah.
Great, great. A big thank you to our viewers and our readers who have joined us, and a reminder to please visit our Facebook page, because on our Facebook page, you can check out all of our 56, 57 authors that we have. You can check out where you can find their books, and also they have their giveaways going on until 10 o'clock tonight. So we want to make sure that everyone knows, go to the Facebook page, which is it's Canaltown Book Fest, and check out what everyone has to offer. And I wanted to let you know too that our next panel will be starting at 1 o'clock, and it will be covering the topic of book marketing tips. That I think we could probably do 5 days on, right?
Yeah, right. Sure.
5 painful days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Painful.
That'll be a good one not to miss. Excuse me. All right. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and end. We'll talk
Thanks.
to you soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for everything.
Yep, it's great.